So we're gonna have a superstar named Maarten. So Maarten was actually in a movie that won an Oscar, and he got like how many few seconds of fame. So I told him today that you're gonna have more like 45 minutes you alone in the tour. So take your time and enjoy the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, I was a baby, so I was selected because I was like the stereotypical Dutch baby, blonde. I'm no longer that blonde, but that's why I was selected out of hundreds of babies. At least that's how my mother tells the story. I'm going to share my screen now. I hope you all hear me, by the way.
Maarten also already has a giveaway PDFs for all of you, so I will upload both of them to Zoom and to Huma. Okay.
Yes, please do it after the talk. So I'm super excited to be here. I'm going to talk about a topic which is very dear to me, beating the feature factory. So I want to stress, I'm a head of product. I've been a product owner. I've been in the trenches for a long time. Next month, I will actually become a consultant, so I'm no longer as much in the trenches. Every company I've joined has been a feature factory. So for some reason, that's a confession I have to make. It always happens for some reason. And some of the companies I've been able to change, and other companies I've utterly failed. I hope we can talk longer about that. I want to stress that this will not be a super long talk because I prefer interacting with the audience over me speaking, but I hope to leave you with some interesting insights. So I'm going to start with telling you a personal story. So I was a product owner working at a company. It was a big company with more than 10,000 employees. And every quarter we had road mapping day. And I would literally wake up dreading that day. I really had a headache. I was really thinking of calling in sick. I really hated it. And I would just be thinking, where's my coffee? I need a coffee to start my day. That's how much I hated it. And why I hated it was because we would literally spend hours and hours in a meeting room discussing the roadmap. So I would sit with like 10 other product managers in a meeting room for a full day. We would discuss 10 team level roadmaps, spending 9 months, mapping all the dependencies with business cases for all initiatives. And then when we did that, there was even more. I would actually sit in a meeting room with the domain owner and the CEO, and I would be grilled all over again. Why did you put this first? Why not the other thing? How sure are you going to make it? It was a totally miserable experience, and it felt completely useless. I felt like a circus animal, like this lion. I had to jump through hoops, please people. But in the end, we had so many rules for this roadmap. Like the colors, there were rules for the teams, for how to map dependencies, for how to do business cases. There were a gazillion rules. And I can tell you one thing, if more rules produced better roadmaps, we were the kings of road mapping. There was only one problem. The moment we started working on the roadmap, then there was no room for learning, experimentation, and innovation. And another problem was that after this session, nobody would look at the roadmaps again. The only moment it would be pulled out is when we would need help from another team. And God forbid you would need help from another team, because if it wasn't on the roadmap, you were totally screwed. You would get no help. The only way you would get, so we became masters of actually not needing help from others and building ugly workarounds. And that's why I called it like a road mapping circus. And so why does this happen, right? So in my opinion, this happens is because in these companies, there's this feature factory mindset. So there's this idea, we know the feature we have to build, and every feature we deliver is guaranteed to deliver value. And then the problem comes, let's get it out of the door as quickly as possible and as reliably as possible. And that's what everybody focuses on. And there's also the assumption that we're capable of delivering on time, even over a period of 9 months. And basically what's happening is you have this kind of bloodbath going on, this struggle, that you have this business side where they have this vision, this strategy, roadmap, where they think in traditional project management, like you can plan 9 months and you need to spend a long time thinking about everything. It's slow and long. And then when they did their job, they throw it over the fence. And that's where the quick feedback loops come in the Agile world. But there's only one problem. If the beginning is slow like that, then you're not going to have a lot of benefit. You're basically just throwing it over the fence. And I want to stress the feature factory mindset is not limited to software. So especially some of the males in the audience, I assume, remember this Mach 3 shaving knife. It was a huge success in USA and Europe. And they actually introduced it in India without talking to a single customer. And it was a total failure. And why was that? If they literally would have talked to one Indian person, they would have found out that on average, the beard hair is a bit coarser and they don't always have access to hot water. And then it's the worst shaving knife. Like it gets clogged, you cannot shave. So it totally flopped. So here's another example. If you just believe that it's going to work without doing a little bit of testing, you're increasing the risk significantly. And the reality of delivering value is it's extremely messy. Like we always talk about the delivery, like how unpredictable it is, but I think value is even more unpredictable. And how I always try to explain it is delivering features doesn't mean you're delivering value. Just like telling a joke doesn't mean people will laugh. So just like if a comedian tells more jokes doesn't mean the audience is going to laugh more. So more features is more value. That's the core feature factory belief. And that's just as foolish as saying more words makes a better book. I mean, one of my favorite books, Camus, The Stranger, is 123 pages. The opening line of that book is legendary. And it doesn't, how do you say? Then you also have books that have a lot of pages that are also good, like Ulysses, like 800 pages. But it doesn't mean that more words makes a better book. Just like more buttons on a remote control doesn't make a better remote control. Or a higher velocity means you are delivering more value. And the key thing here, what goes wrong is there's this focus on output versus outcome. So here's some nice quotes that explain it. So you want to upgrade your user. You don't want to upgrade your product. You want to make something possible for them that they were not capable of doing before. You don't want to make better cameras. You want to build better photographers. Another example is from Revlon. In the factory, we make cosmetics, and in the store, we sell hope. So it's about like the lady or guy that goes to an interview and feels confident during the interview because they look well. And how I always phrase it is that the effort in your product only shows to the extent it makes a difference to your customer. Customers want progress in their lives. And this is also a famous quote, like people don't want to buy a 1/4 inch drill, they want a 1/4 inch hole. That is actually a lie. And I will tell you a story from a personal example, personal experience. So I bought a new house, the walls are concrete, and I wanted to put up a bookcase for my daughter. And I don't know if anybody has drilled in concrete, but you need a concrete drill bit and it makes a lot of noise and it's not necessarily easy unless you have a great drill. And I actually don't want it a hole. I don't want to make a noise. I don't want to hear my neighbors complain about the noise. I don't want to make a mess that I have to clean up. If I could do it without making a hole, that would be amazing. And yeah, so I would like to, what I wanted was this sense of accomplishment after I installed it, you know, like that my partner was proud of me, the feeling of calmness, that the room of my daughter looks organized, and happiness when I see her now capable of taking a look and picking her own books that I have to read for her. And what makes focusing outcomes hard is that we don't always know what matters or what is value. So this is a very famous quote from the advertising guru Ogilvy. Consumers don't think how they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. And asking the customer what feature they want means you've already lost. A concrete example I always make is if you ask people, is the environment important? They will always say, yes, it's important. And then if you start asking, okay, so how often do you fly around the world? Or what do you do about it actually? Then you get a much clearer picture. And that's the difference between what people declare and what they actually reveal with their actions. So you see a lot of these quotes on LinkedIn talking about outputs and outcomes. And I think a lot of these people are missing the point because they say you should forget the output and focus on the outcome. It's output versus outcomes, or outcomes are the only thing that matters. And I think these people are missing the point. So outcomes over outputs does not mean outputs do not matter. They absolutely matter. The two are not opposing things. It's actually, without outputs, you cannot have outcomes. And let me make it concrete. This is an example from losing weight. So imagine you would want to lose some weight. There's some different things you can do, some different outputs. You could eat an apple per day. You could walk 12 miles, or you could stop drinking alcohol. Imagine I would start eating an apple per day, probably wouldn't have the intended impact, but 12 miles per day, maybe that would make me achieve the outcome. And if you have an output that drives the impact, that is the outcome. And that's why we have to find the outputs that drive the outcomes we are looking for. And knowing what you want to achieve is the easy part, but figuring out what behavior drives that result is what makes it difficult. How do you do that? And that's where actually the North Star framework in. It's a very powerful framework. What I'd actually ask you to do is to define a single metric that captures both customer value and business value. So let me give you an example from Spotify. So if customers listen to more music, the time spent listening to music will increase. But if there are more people getting a Spotify account, time spent listening to music will also increase. So that means there's more business value. So these two things both affect time spent listening to music, and it reflects both customer value and business value. And then you can influence that. And I want to stress there's this common misconception about the North Star framework that it's all about defining one thing. That's absolutely untrue. It's all about the constellation of inputs that influence your North Star. And that's something, those are all like an hypothesis. Like here's an example. If you would bring users back more often through notifications, probably they'll spend more time listening to music. And you can actually track all these things. And especially the metrics on the left, they will be more leading. So you can actually very quickly see if it's happening. And then you can see, does it have the intended effect on the North Star? And then the assumption is, does this North Star affect customer value and business value? So this is a really powerful way actually to make value more tangible, because I think the biggest reason why companies operate as a feature factory is because they cannot express value that easily. If you work in e-commerce, for example, and you increase the page speed, probably you'll get more money. But if you work like I did for a project management tool, if you make it easier to plan a project, you save 50% of time, how much money you're going to get. That relationship is much more murky. And that's why you need a model like this so you can develop that understanding. So the way you could look at it is on the left, you have your product catalog, all the things you can do. And then you have the metrics, the leading metrics you can influence. And then you can see whether they influence the North Star metric. And then the assumption is if you keep doing that over the long term, you will see the lagging value that you want to see. Just like losing weight, if you go to the gym once, you won't see it. So you need to keep doing it, and then you will see over time that it has an impact. And here you actually see, if you think about Scrum, there are actually 3 feedback loops going on. And in many companies, actually, there's only 1 feedback loop going on, or actually maybe that's where most of the time is spent. Let's put it that way. So the main focus of many Scrum teams, especially feature factories, is delivery. So I call this kind of like the Scrum realm. So the sprint planning, and the daily Scrum, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective, they all revolve around delivery, what we're going to deliver. And the situational practice also revolve around that, like doing unit testing, doing behavior-driven development, and all these kind of things. But in reality, the discovery practices are extremely quick. Like you can literally pick up the phone, talk to a customer, and you get a lot of information, while the delivery is far slower. Like imagine you have a sprint of 2 weeks, it's around 2 weeks, right? And the validation can be even longer. I mean, running an A/B test can take months, and seeing an increased subscriptions can also take a long time, longer than a sprint. And that's why it's very important that you pay enough attention here instead of just focusing on delivery. So what I see happening is many teams, I call this getting sucked in the sprint bubble. They only focus on the sprint. And some of the reasons is, for example, when teams are only empowered to deliver what's added to the sprint, you get a feature factory. When you plan sprints at full capacity of the team in terms of delivery, you also get a feature factory because there's no room to think about discovery. There's no room to think about validation. If you maximize flow, only thinking about delivery, so delivery of features, there will be no time to do discovery and validation either. And that's why it's super important that Scrum teams have to work at a sustainable pace. There needs to be time to catch their breath. There needs to be time to talk to customers, to validate things. Because in the end, we want to have empowered teams, right? So we want to have self-managing teams that work on delivering value, not just delivering features. But to achieve this, Scrum teams must work beyond the sprint horizon, because discovery should happen ahead of delivery. And validation usually happens after delivery. It doesn't happen in the same time horizon. And that's why Scrum teams have to work on past sprints, like to validate, hey, did they actually deliver the value we expect on the current sprint, but also on upcoming sprints. And this leaves a bad taste in our mouth because it feels like waterfall. But to me, it's an inevitable truth that we have to do it because otherwise you just get sucked in delivering features. And that's a very ineffective way of delivering value. And a way around this is to just see it as refinement. It's used to break down work, but could also be used for discovery and validation work. And I want to stress, to make matters even worse, every team is operating in this cycle and they're all dependent on each other. So if you just focus on delivery, there will be no room for anything. So I want to stress, to beat the feature factory, Scrum has to move to the background. Perfectly incomplete still means incomplete. The sprint should not be the main feedback loop of interest. The main feedback loop should be on the value. And it's one of the many feedback loops we should be watching. So we should not ignore it because in the end, outputs drive outcomes. And the situational practices that make Scrum work should be at the forefront, not Scrum itself. For example, using something like the North Star framework. And empowered teams are at the core of delivering value, not just what's delivered at the sprint, but all the steps that are necessary to increase the confidence that we're delivering value. Let's make it a bit more concrete. Like, how do you do this, right? So in my opinion, one of the biggest mistakes is the concept of a sprint. People already get this feeling of a rush. You need to complete something. The sprint should feel like a pendulum that swings by. It just happens. It's not a rush deadline where you complete all the tickets in the sprint. If you're operating that way, guaranteed feature factory. The team needs to be pulled out of this bubble of the sprint, out of this delivery bubble. Don't focus on maximizing the flow of the feature delivery. Get them slowly involved in discovery and validation, because then you will get much better feedback loops. It's kind of like a comedian, right? That tries out jokes at a tryout to hear if people are laughing. You need to get those quick feedback loops going. It's much more effective than planning a whole event and then seeing whether your jokes are effective. We need to talk about the customer more, like at the retrospective, like how confident are we that we're delivering value instead of just the delivery part. The sprint review should be much more focused on around value delivery, not simply product demo. So the product increment is everything, right? It's not just this current sprint or what we added in the past sprint. It's the whole product. How is it doing? How can we see we're delivering more value? And we should put features live already before the sprint review and already collect data. And we should discover these leading indicators, like what are people doing in our product? What are they trying to achieve? How does this influence the North Star? And then you can discover what drives these lagging value objectives. And that is when you get the short feedback loops where empiricism shines. And if you remember one thing from this talk, perfect Scrum is like perfect grammar. It doesn't matter if people don't care what you have to say. So don't focus just on the Scrum. Focus on the situational practices, covering the whole spectrum that is necessary to deliver value. And I want to stress on the right, that's something I'm really proud of. That's my book. It's coming out next year. And if you want to collaborate or work together, I quit my job, so you can visit my website. Thank you for listening. And I'm very curious for the audience questions.
Okay, so everybody can unmute themselves if you want. And ask live. Come on. I don't see anything yet in the chat, but this might be due to the lag a bit. So if anybody is typing, you can quickly paste the same question to the Zoom chat.
Or I lulled everyone to sleep.
No, I don't think so. Like, there are almost 100 people in the chat, so I'm pretty sure somebody's awake. Maybe. Okay, maybe I should just point fingers to somebody. Okay, I'm gonna.
I see there's a question here which says, how would you define value and how to measure it? That's not from me, but it's in chat.
That's a good question, right? What's valuable is highly dependent on your product, like, and as well who you're targeting with your product. I mean, I don't think there's a single answer for that. let me give you an example. What a person, like the target demographic of a Ferrari is very different than the target demographic of a Ford car. And that's why I really think that you first need to think about what are people trying to achieve? Like, what are their goals? What is the problem they're trying to solve? Jobs to be done is a really good way of finding out these kind of things. Like, why are people hiring your product? You need to do specific interviewing techniques to uncover the jobs to be done. And then when you have that, you can make a model, like with the North Star framework, like what are people actually doing to achieve those goals, and measure whether they're achieving those goals. And yeah, there's not a single answer. So a good example is Picnic, like it's a Dutch online supermarket. So what they actually try to do is save people time, like convenience. That's what they focus. People order online because they have better things to do than go to the shopping market. So what they actually measure is how long does it take for someone to order their shopping basket. And they actually reduce that time through better recommendations. And so this is a good example of a company that really understands, like, what is the value we're delivering and how do you measure it? I hope this clarifies.
You have another question. So Mantas is asking you, Maarten, have you ever managed to not be a part of a factory?
Yes, I have. So I think the key thing there is influencing people, stakeholder management. And sometimes you're able to change minds, let's put it that way, influence people, and sometimes you fail. And I always try to see what I could have done better, right? But I think influencing people is very, very, very difficult. And I've had great successes, but I've also bumped into walls. And if I knew what was causing that wall, right? Yeah. So I think one of the key things, for example, is if you talk about when you come in, right? So I came in at my current job, I saw their road mapping process, and I immediately started talking about like 9 months roadmaps. That's not how it works, like based on my experience. And I gave them many examples. I've rebuilt 5 products. None of them were delivered on time. The 6th product was kind of delivered on time. The only time I succeeded, but the quality was still low. Someone could argue even the 6th product that I've helped to rebuild, not delivered on time. And yeah, I try to explain, like, what does it mean to do complex work with everyday examples. And that's how I kind of start the conversation going. And I try to do that with every important stakeholder. And I try to repeat it until they get it, or the message comes across and they hate me. But that's what I try to do. But those are, I think, the first steps. Like, if they don't even understand, if they believe, like, for example, that you're not predictable means that you're incompetent, which is often the case, like, then you can talk about beating the feature factor or what value means. But the first thing you need to make them understand is, what does it mean to do complex work? So there's no recipe to success, unfortunately. I'm just giving you some examples of how I approach it.
Okay, so you have a long one, again from Antas, a follow-up question, that is. Who should be the carrier of the flag when it comes to stakeholder management and getting those folks more invested? Product owners, Scrum Masters, Scrum team as a whole?
So I think the unfortunate situation is that usually product owners, so I don't think there's one right answer, right? So, but usually what you see is that product owners have a closer relationship with the business stakeholders. And they usually are used to dealing with these sharks, if I may call them, right? Like these CEOs, these C-level types. So in my experience, I often do it myself, like as a product owner. But I also want to stress, if you work with a great Scrum Master or Agile coach who has a lot of experience, maybe more than a product owner, in how to build reports and a great business understanding, work together with them. I want to say in development teams, I usually have not worked with a development team where you see those strong stakeholder management skills, those political skills. Like, usually developers don't develop them because they're not necessary for their job. They're not hired for those skills. I'm not saying that people that are developers don't have these skills. It's just usually more unlikely, in my experience. So I hope I'm not offending anyone when I say that.
Okay. At least in Lietuva, these are all the questions that we had. Do we have anybody here live who would like to ask Maarten somebody?
Hey, Martin.
Hey,
Big fan, following you on LinkedIn for a while, and all the
thank
best
you.
with your book. And I just saw this triple track Agile slide that you were presenting. Actually, my boss is presenting on another session right now, but I still chose to come here. So,
Thank you. I'm
yeah,
humbled. Thank you.
I saw your slide on triple track
Yeah.
Agile. And I was wondering what's the sort of the cadence? I mean, you said like within a sprint, you should also be already like looking at discovery for the next sprint and validation for the past sprint. Um, but could you imagine like also a cadence sort of outside of the sprint, like we used OKRs and like some other stuff? Yeah, I was just curious how else we
Yeah.
could tackle this. Yeah.
So in my opinion, right, this is kind of a semantic discussion in the sense that you're always in a sprint. In the sense, like when one sprint ends, the other one begins. So you're
Yeah.
always in the sprints. So I think the key thing there is that every 2 weeks at least, right? Assuming you're working on a 2-week cadence. So every 2 weeks, you're doing something that should have an influence, and that also means that every 2 weeks you can already start measuring and start seeing like, hey, we released these features, right? For example, to reduce the time to plan the project. Are people actually still planning projects? Do they get it? Or do we see actually slightly more? You can already start taking a look. So I think it's kind of like the same cadence as a sprint. You should just take a look like, hey, what did we deliver? How is it doing? The sprint review is a great place. As regarding discovery, it really depends. For example, if you have stakeholders asking for a Google Calendar integration, I actually just called up a few customers. Within 1 hour, I found out that they didn't need a Google Calendar integration, right? So they needed something else. So I think it's also kind of situational, because it could also be that what they wanted really is a Google Calendar integration, right? It's really going to help them, and you understand the problem they're trying to solve. Then a good next step could be to make a mock-up or a high fidelity prototype to show them like, hey, how do you get this? Like, would this help you to achieve your goals, etc. So there's not one right way of doing it, and that's what makes it so hard. Like,
Yeah.
So I hope this gives a little bit of insights.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Maarten.
Thanks, Ricky, for asking and being brave. So see, Maarten, you brought all your fan club here. You're already like on a good way. So you have another question from Monica, and she's asking how to have the discussions about delivering value if you are just entering the market and have no customers yet.
So basically the question is, you're just entering the market, so you have no. So I think that means you have a lot of value uncertainty. So I think you should actually be talking to a lot of customers and you doing a lot of discovery first, because discovery feedback loops can be the quickest. Like nowadays in Figma, you can literally in 1 week whip something up. But of course, you should first talk, right? Like understand, hey, I assume when you start with a product, there's a vision or an idea, right? Like this is what we want to do. And then by talking to customers, you can get a better idea. But talking is not enough, right? You need to show something to them. So I would actually say, start doing a lot of discovery, like reading a lot about the different practice, like the discovery habits by tourists. That's where you should focus on. And then, of course, if you already know that you're going to need certain things, right? And there's a budget, you can already start maybe working on login. Probably you're going to need that for every product. So, it's about being sensible. It also depends like how much of a rush there is. So, but I can safely assume most products you need a login. Hope this answers your question.
Okay, anybody else brave and ask live?
I see a hand.
You see hands? Okay.
Oh, now it's gone, but it was Mantas, I think.
Okay, Mante, go ahead.
Sorry if I butchered your name.
No, that's okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly fine.
Cool. So my question is an off-topic one. Why didn't you come to Vilnius? I bought a ticket to Agile Tour just because of you, mate.
Oh, yeah. So this is there are two reasons. I'm just going to be honest. Like the first reason is my brother turned 40. So yesterday, so I would have missed that. Yeah, so that's kind of like a personal reason. Yeah, the other reason is I know this is my last month at my current job, and yeah, I don't think they would give me off. I'm too busy hiring other people. So
does that mean that next year we will see you here physically in Vilnius?
I mean, I'm not the one doing the invites, right? I'm not the one, but I'm
you're the one who is applying, so yeah, we'll bring him here, Monty. Don't worry. This year we kind of had some doubts if we will be able to do it on site at all due to the COVID, because we are planning events 1 year up front. So just keep in mind that it's not like a last minute event that is happening. So we kind of been biased a bit because last year it was still lockdown for everything. Yeah, but we got it. Maarten, so pack your stuff for the next year. I'm telling you, you have all your biggest fans here. So fan club. Okay. I don't see any other questions. So thank you, Maarten, for a brilliant presentation.